So today my topic, as you see, is weedless gardening. My weedless garden, I mean. And since you all garden, you know that that's an impossibility. So my topic will not be my weedless garden. It'll be, actually it'll be about my garden that's free of weed problems. So I do have weeds, but they're not a problem. So I'll talk about that. And what I'm going to talk about is a system that sort of evolved over the years. It's a 4-part system that I drew on both my own experience, a lot of gardening. I used to work in plant and soil research with Cornell University and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I read a lot of books. A lot of other gardeners have sort of touched on aspects of this. And I also looked to see what happens in nature. So this 4-part system really does quell weed problems. And one reason I think it works is because it really does follow along with what happens in nature. So by emulating natural systems, sort of if you fight Mother Nature continuously, she always wins. So a lot of what I'm going to say goes along with what you see happening in nature, and that's, I believe, why it works. And so as I said, it's a 4-part system. It's applicable to all sorts of gardens, flower gardens, vegetable gardens, planting trees, shrubs, ground covers, everything. And the nice thing about it is the 4 parts really integrate together. So each part might contribute something to decreasing weeds, but all 4 together really does even more. And the other thing I want to point out is that each part that I'll mention also has other benefits besides weed control. So that's another nice aspect of it. So what I'd like to do is start out with, I did some thinking early on when I started gardening about how we got where we are weed-wise. And I decided to lay the blame right here, not on Grant Wood, who did this painting, but on Jethro Tull, who designed the implement in the front of the painting, the moldboard plow. Jethro Tull was an 18th century farmer and writer in Britain who advocated thorough pulverization of the soil on the incidentally erroneous assumption that roots could better gobble up nutrients from the soil the more thoroughly pulverized it was. So up to that point and beyond, a sign of a good gardener or farmer has always been the more you pulverize your soil, the better the better gardener or farmer you are. So you might wonder, what does this all have to do with weeds? So we go to the next slide. Here we have a time-lapse illustration showing what happens when you dig a soil, when you turn it over. Buried within every soil there's a lot of weed seeds, and those seeds stay dormant, and the only thing they're waiting to awaken them is light and or air. So what happens when you turn over the soil? You expose them to light and air, and they germinate. And this isn't something that I just decide, well, this must be true in my own backyard. This is something the USDA has been researching for a while, to the extent where they, on a farm scale, they looked into, or they have been looking into, what would be the benefits of farmers tilling at night rather than during the day. So, and they found that there were less weeds. But before anybody goes out and buys night vision goggles, gets ready to till at night, the amount of light that it takes to stimulate a weed seed to germinate is much less than the amount of light you need to, say, get a plant to grow. So if you are going to till at night, don't do it when there's a full moon, maybe even a half moon. Anyway, what I decided at that point was that rather than till at night or and wait for no moon, that I would just abandon tillage. So my soil in my gardens never gets tilled. I haven't tilled the soil in over 25 years. That means I never turn it over with a rototiller, with a garden fork, or anything like that. And this is one big factor in decreasing my weed problems. And as I said, that each one of these things I'm talking about has other benefits. There are other benefits to not tilling the soil also. For instance, one benefit is, in spring, if you're going to plant annuals or you're going to plant vegetables, you have to sort of wait for the soil to dry out some before you can till it, because you should never till a wet soil. And then you till it, you sow seeds, then you wait for rain, because then you got to have wetter soil to get the seeds to germinate. So one thing is, if you don't till the soil, you don't have to wait in spring to plant. Another benefit, you have to really like soil for these next 2 photos. is not tilling. I did dig a hole just for the purpose of this talk. So if you don't till the soil, you preserve the natural horizonation of the soil. You know, if you look in nature, soils aren't tilled up and uniform from top to bottom. You have this natural horizonation where the richest, best aerated, highest organic matter soil is near the surface, and it decreases as plants go down. And this is, I mean, as you increase depth. And this is, you know, goes in keeping with that roots, most roots of all plants, whether you're talking about an oak tree or a marigold plant, most of the feeder roots are near the surface. And this is where you have the richest soil, so by preserving this natural horizonation, this is more the way plants grow. Another benefit of not tilling is when soils are not tilled, they build up this almost crystalline-like structure where you have like large pores, small pores, and air can travel through these pores, water can travel through these pores, you know, worms can travel through these pores, and it really makes for a good root run. So here's my next cheesecake shot of soil. And you can see it has a nice, you know, when people talk about tilth, it's a nice crumbly structure in the soil. By not tilling it, you maintain that crumbly structure. Another benefit of not tilling the soil is, I don't know if anybody remembers that Troy-Bilt used to make rototillers. I don't think they do anymore. But they used to have these ads years ago in gardening magazines, usually on the back page where they said, you know, till your soil and you'll be able to put your arm into it right up to your elbow. It'll be so loose. So what happens then is when water's added to such a soil, you have all these big pores. You know, they're big pores because you can put your arm right into it. But the water, when water falls on that soil, whether by rainfall or by a watering can, it just runs right through the soil beyond the roots. Whereas when you don't till the soil and you let it build up this nice crystalline structure, you have capillary pores, larger pores, and if you remember from high school biology, capillary pores, they can actually pull water against gravity. So when you let this good structure form, you add water, water can actually go sideways to the roots, it can actually even go up to the roots. So you get much better water use in a soil that's not tilled. Another benefit. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of tillage. All of you must know the benefit of organic matter or humus in the soil. It has a lot of physical benefits. A lot of it helps feed the plants. It has a lot of biological benefits. You know, helps quell disease organisms. Anyway, there's a lot of benefits of organic matter or humus. What happens when you till a soil is you charge it with so much oxygen that it burns up the organic matter too quickly. So this chart was taken from some U.S. Department of Agriculture research. So this would be a 5% organic matter soil, which is relatively good. And here's when the soil was tilled, and then it drops, goes way down to below 1%, and then just stays there as it's tilled, because it's almost like you know, you can add organic matter, but when you keep tilling the soil, it's like taking money out of a bank faster than you put it in. It just decreases your organic matter. So you maintain much higher levels of organic matter by not tilling the soil. And the final reason not to till the soil is so that you don't have to till the soil. This is actually a photograph of double digging, which has anybody ever double dug anything? This is if you really want to feel self-righteous or righteous, you double dig, but the plants won't benefit that much.
When you have a harvest.
What's that?
When you have a harvest, how do you clean the soil?
I'll get into all that.
Because if you're not
Yeah. I thought of that.
Sorry.
Okay, so that was the first thing I did, is I just totally abandoned tillage. Now, there are some reasons, you know, if you ask people, why do you till the soil, they come up with various reasons. They might say, you know, because it cleans up, gets rid of weeds. But we know what happens also. It gets rid of weeds then, but it makes new weeds later. Another reason people might say is because it aerates the soil. And that is true, it does aerate the soil because, you know, soils become compacted over time and roots do need air, so you till to aerate the soil. But if you look around in nature, I mean, you know, in fields and forests, these soils are not aerated by us, but plants grow fine. So why do we have to aerate our garden soils? The reason is because we're always walking on them, or were, rolling carts over them or little tractors. So the second thing I did, so you can't just give up tillage and then garden as usual. The second thing I did is in my garden I laid out permanent areas for walking and permanent areas for planting. And then I never walk in the planted areas, and then they never need to be aerated. I should mention also there's one other reason that people sometimes don't say, but I think it's true why people till, because it makes them feel good in spring. It's like, you get this. So what I always recommend for that is if you are one of those people, you set aside like a 2-foot by 2-foot area, and this will be your tillage area. And you just dig it up, dig it to your heart's content. And then then hopefully you like to weed, so you also get to weed that area. Okay, so anyway, so I did lay out my garden, as I said, in permanent, planting areas and permanent walking areas or traffic areas. And then when I first started the garden, I invited some neighbors over to, help me do this, and did a little woodcut of everybody at work. I have a lot of peasants who are neighbors, and we fed them bread and soup, and we had a great time. Here's the way it looked when color film was invented, and then a few years later. Some people think when I'm talking about, I was very careful to say permanent walking areas, permanent, traffic areas, not to say beds and paths, because then people think, raised beds. So I'm not necessarily talking about raised beds, just here's where you walk, here's where you plant. But I do have beds. They're not raised beds, but they are beds. So in the planted areas, as I said, pretty much no one ever walks. When my daughter was very young, she learned, she just picked up the vibes that, we don't walk here. Occasionally there have been interlopers. This was a neighbor's child. He evidently thought my soil was a little too loose and needed some compaction. Also, it doesn't even have to be beds and paths as far as planting, as far as walking areas and traffic areas. For instance, in a flower garden, where you don't have to go in and out of as much as in a vegetable garden, because you're not always like harvesting, replanting, and things like that. It could just be stepping stones. So here's some stepping stones in one of my flower beds, and if I step off it, it doesn't matter that much because I don't go into the garden that much. I don't have to walk in. And then later in the season, you can see, actually, here's one of the stepping stones. So obviously, I don't make too many trips into that garden. It's just dense. There's no reason to have to get in there. And the beds and paths can be laid out various ways. I decide sometimes, the paths, if you have beds and paths, you could make them out of grass. I did an extensive area of my backyard, and really, made these big plantings. No, this isn't my house. I live right at the bottom of the hill where, if anybody ever heard of Mohonk Mountain House? So that's up the street from me. It's my backyard. It's sort of it's my extended backyard. I am. And as I said, there's a lot of other benefits to each of these things. So one of the benefits to this planting in designated areas is you don't necessarily have to always, you can get more plants out of a given area. For instance, talking about vegetables again, say with onions. Is it my eyes or? You want them off? On, right. They like them on. I like them on too.
You can see fine.
Right.
But it's a lot nicer than the picture without them. Maybe just the very back one.
The front one. Oh yeah. Okay. Anyway, if you just turn the front one off, just the front one off. Anyway, back to what I was saying. My voice has limited capability, so I don't want to waste my breath about with the lights. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the amount of, so getting back to vegetables, say if you look on a packet of, say, carrot seeds, it'll say you sow a row, then, 18 inches apart, you sow another row. Carrots don't need that much space. That space is for you to walk in between them. But if you have things planted in bed, you don't necessarily have to walk between them. You just have to reach in and do it. So here's, for instance, a bed I have of onions where they're only like 4 inches apart. So in one bed, 3 feet wide, I have 4 or 5 rows of onions. And from that one bed that's 3 feet by 11 feet, I can harvest 60 pounds of onions. And same thing with flowers. You can pack a lot of flowers into a little spot. Another advantage of bed planting is you can mix different plants within the same bed. Here's a bed of endive and broccoli. And you can see the other nice thing about that is the plants are so dense when you do with designated planting areas, you don't have to worry as much about weeds trying to get through there because there's no light for them. Another nice thing about bed planting is you can use the beds as part of the design. Just sort of the design of the garden. So one year I planted lettuces, come in all sorts of different varieties, colors, textures. So I thought it'd be cool to have like a little living tapestry of lettuces. So I did this, had like green ones, frilly red ones, all different kinds. The one limitation I should point out in this design is that you can't eat any of it or you mess up the whole design. So that was... And then the other nice thing about it as far as design is the beds themselves can contribute to the design. So here's an overall view of my garden for a different area. So I made the bed square, in the box. Here's a little more rustic. Here's a little more rustic view of the backyard. That was the front yard. Here's the backyard. So you can see the beds. They add a sort of orderliness to the garden rather than just this expanse of, just soil or plants. So that was the second thing. So third part of this system is even if you plant in beds and never till, it does not mean you'll never get any weeds. Weeds still do come in the garden. Birds drop weed seeds, wind blows it in. I'll demonstrate it here. So the third thing I did was I maintained a thin covering of some weed-free organic material always over the soil, so there's never bare soil showing. And this isn't, I know some of you might know about, say the root stout method of mulching, it's like a foot deep of hay or something. This is only, only needs a few inches or even an inch of some weed-free organic material. And the other benefit, I'll talk about what materials in a second, but some of the other benefits are, first of all, as with any mulch, it shields the ground from being overheated in the summer by sunlight. It makes rainfall, it softens the impact of raindrops so the rain can percolate in, which also works nicely with the not tilling and having the capillary action moving the water around, so you get much more efficient water use. Here's the way my soil does not look. This is a local farm. You basically get this cracked surface as opposed to a nice soft surface like this. So this just shows different types of coverings that you can use that are weed-free organic coverings. What I choose depends basically on what's available, what plants I'm growing, and what look I want, because this can also contribute to the appearance of a garden. If you have a formal flower garden, you don't want to be laying straw down on it, because that just doesn't usually go with people's idea of what it looks like. So in the vegetable garden, I use, in the beds, the planting beds in the vegetable garden, I use compost. And so this is weed-free compost. And the nice thing about compost is it's very rich in nutrients, and vegetables use a lot of nutrients. Grass clippings are also another thing that's readily available, makes a nice covering. And there's a lot of things when you start to look at this. Is once again back on Mohonk, they have a knot garden. And knot gardens are usually made up of plants that are not very demanding as far as soil. You don't want a rich soil in a knot garden, so you would surely not use compost. Plus, it's a very formal type garden, so you don't want to have straw or something looking very rough. You want something very finely divided. So I think this is either buckwheat hulls or cocoa bean hulls, something like that, which makes a nice covering and fulfills the other functions needed. Okay, so that was the third part. And what I do is I try and maintain the cover on the on the ground, so that these organic materials do break down. And when they break down, they need to be replenished. So I always make sure that bare soil never shows through. Okay, the fourth part of the system is if any part of the garden needs regular watering, and that's a qualifier because not every part, this is the humid Northeast, so gardens presumably, 100 years ago people didn't have sprinklers and water gardens. So, but if there's any part of the garden that needs regular watering, the way to go is with drip irrigation. Shown in its most primitive here, there's the drip, there's the plant, drip irrigation. But, and the reason I qualified is because the application for drip irrigation would be, say, if you had a very formal British-type flower garden, like with delphiniums or roses. These are plants that really do demand rich soil and, and very good growing conditions. So that would be a candidate for drip irrigation. Or a vegetable garden where you really want to get maximum production out of. So just briefly, what drip irrigation is, in case you don't know, it's a inexpensive plastic tube with holes in it that, if you have plants close together, like in a bed, the holes are close together. If you have plants spaced far apart, like trees or shrubs, they're further apart. Now, one time I was doing this consulting job, and somebody said, I've been doing drip irrigation for decades. He said, I just take a hose and I poke some holes in it, and that's my drip irrigation. That is not drip irrigation. The reason being, first of all, when you do the holes, at the end of the line, you get less water than the beginning of the line. If there's any change in elevation, the lower parts get more than the higher parts. And if there's any change in incoming water pressure, you basically don't know how much water is coming out. So that's not drip irrigation. The second, another not drip irrigation, some of you probably have tried this, soaker hoses. I think soaker hoses are among the most useless things.
Could you say more about that?
I think soaker hoses are among, no. Well, they have basically the same limitations as a perforated hose. They have these changes. You don't know how much water is coming out. I actually once wrote an article, and I tested soaker hoses. Beginning of the season, end of the season, buried, not buried, and the output's so variable. You never know how much water's coming out. Plus, over time, the output will decrease because they do get clogged. For true drip irrigation is not. I think it might even be cheaper than soaker hoses, and it works so much better. I mean, true drip irrigation. Oh, we got a slide here. Here's true drip irrigation. Here's a 1/4 inch thick line. Every 6 inches are these things. See the hole? I stood here for half an hour waiting. No, it dripped more frequently. But these are not just perforated pipes. These are holes that are engineered to, first of all, not get clogged up, and secondly, to deliver water at a very consistent rate. Like I think there's a half a gallon per hour. So you know that everywhere along this line, you're getting a half a gallon per hour of water. And it won't change over time. And so it's no easier it's actually less obtrusive than soaker hose even. I think it's most people do soaker hoses just because marketing has made, has promoted them more.
What is that pipe made of? What is it? Yeah, what is that pipe?
It's plastic. Plastic.
It looks like bamboo.
Oh no, that's because it's got these swellings, but that's where it's like these engineered orifices that really make it, yeah. It's just 1/4 inch thick. You just, basically you lay it out, plug one end, plug the other end into a main line, and it's quite simple. Yeah?
It looks like it's raised from the ground.
Well, I did that so I could get the drip going down. This is a little hole just to keep it in place, but it wouldn't necessarily be raised. I mean, it could be raised or not.
Where do you get that?
Oh, actually, wasn't there a handout that everybody has?
There's a handout over there.
Oh, and
Want us to pass it around?
yeah, would you? Over there.
Oh.
I think on the bottom of the handout I might have sources for it. The place where I get it, there's a few places, but the place where I get it is DripWorks. It's a place called DripWorks. It's out in California. California, everybody does drip irrigation, so.
And is that hooked into the hose or the bit?
I
shouldn't say the bit. The
Bib.
faucet?
Oh yeah, either one.
Oh,
So how come you can regulate that and you couldn't regulate a hose with holes in it?
Oh, that's good. The question is, how come you can regulate this but not a hose with holes in it? Because this is not just holes. This has like pressure compensating orifice that's also self-cleaning. It's not just a hole. This is like, you know, the water swirls around. There's all sorts of things. They're really highly engineered orifice that makes it so that the pressure, I mean, they sell some kinds of drip irrigation that are used commercially. I mean, a farmer will lay out 1,000 feet, and you'll get the same output at the beginning as at the end, even if there's a change in elevation. Yeah?
Isn't there a timer?
Oh, yeah. I'll get to that. Okay, so just a couple things about drip irrigation. People sometimes think that drip irrigation, you have to put the place where the water comes out, the emitter, right next to each plant that you want to water. In fact, water spreads sideways once it gets into the soil through capillary action, and this ties in nicely with not tilling because you have actually more capillary action. So just to show you, if you had like a clay soil and you had one drip coming down here and you had heavy clay soil, you would get a 6-foot spread of water within the soil. And even in a silt soil, a sand soil, you even get a 2-foot spread. So it waters a broader area. And then the other nice thing about drip irrigation, oh, you might wonder what this has to do with weeds. Right, we're going to talk about weeds. The thing it has to do with weeds, when you use a sprinkler in a garden, you're basically democratically watering everything between far-spaced plants, paths, everywhere. Here, wait.
They don't have them on that.
So you're promoting weed growth everywhere and wasting water. By pinpointing the water in the beds, you're not wasting as much water. You're not promoting weed growth where you don't want any plants to grow. So another nice thing about drip irrigation, the woman mentioned the timer. This is one of my favorite things about drip irrigation, because in a really dry summer, people often ask me, you know, so how's your garden growing? You know, it's just dry and sunny all the time. I mean, I love summers like that because my drip irrigation does all the water and we get sunlight all the time, you know, no diseases. So all I do is, here's the hose spigot, put this timer here. You do need a filter and a pressure reducer. And I just put the timer, this whole part comes in each season because it can't be allowed to be exposed to freezing. But everything else stays outside. So I put it out in, you know, in May, bring it in October, and I don't think about watering the whole season. And then as far as where the water comes out of, you saw that 1/4-inch dripper line. If you have widely spaced plants, what you do is you have this solid, inexpensive, because it's thin wall plastic pipe that just runs out to the garden or among other wood plants. And if you have plants that are spaced far apart, you buy these emitters and you actually have this punch. You just punch a hole, put an emitter wherever you want along there. But you know, in a vegetable garden or a flower garden, you just want a continuous swath of water, so then you use those, oh right, this one. The same pipe again. And this is just one kind. There are other kinds of, you know, drip pipes. And is that place listed on the sheet?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. And then here's the way it looks in the garden. In these beds, in this case I had 2 lines going up each bed. I since took that out, and now I have just 1 line going up each bed. And as I said, it's nice. I don't think about watering at all. And just, what I have here actually is there's a main line, that solid line runs here, and then I tap these into them. And the only reason you don't see these aren't because, you know, I have them buried 2 feet deep. I just have them buried enough, and I threw mulch on top of them just so I don't trip on them. Okay, so that basically is the system. And what I'd like to do now is just talk about, say you have a new garden area and you want to start a garden. How do you do this and start a new garden if you don't want to till and you want to, you know, do all this? Okay, this would not be the way. This was when I was younger, hairier, and less wise. And you can see I'm not looking very happy wrestling that rototiller. So here's the more smart way to start a garden. Next door to where I lived, there was a little cottage where we were going to put in a very, 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 very small garden. So first thing I did is I just mowed. I just basically wanted to leave the vegetation in place because the soil structure under lawn is really excellent. So to till it up, not only does it bring up weed seeds, not only does it delay planting, but it also ruins all that structure. So what I want to do is just get rid of that vegetation in place without disturbing the soil. So I mowed it. Then what I did is I put down paper. Newspaper was convenient. I put down 4 sheets of paper, overlapped them, and wetted them. The reason I wet them is so they don't blow away, and also so that I'm going to be planting above this. Roots can actually grow into and through the wet paper into the soil below. And then any place I was going to plant, I put down compost. An inch should be enough because one thing it does is just hides the paper and provides a little root, a little area for the roots to start. I actually had excess compost, so I put down more than an inch. Then notice the smile versus the rototiller picture. Then I put down wood chips. I mean, it's nice to have a different mulch in the, a different covering or mulch in the paths versus the beds so people know where to step. So in the one single path in this very, very, very small garden, I put down wood chips. Then when it was time to plant, which was as soon as I did that, I had some thyme plants. All I did is I sort of pulled aside the compost on top of the paper, and then just tucked, I didn't even make a hole in the paper, just tucked the thyme plants, because they had relatively shallow roots, into the compost there. I also had a larger plant, a potentilla bush, so that had a root ball about like this. So I actually pulled aside the compost, made a hole in the paper, dug into the soil, just big enough to get the root ball in, and then tucked everything back in place. And then really, literally, it's probably like 2 or 3 hours later, had this little garden. The nice thing about it is, first of all, less weeds. Secondly, it's instantaneous. If you did it conventionally, you would till the soil, you wait 2 weeks while everything calms down, and plus go through the trouble of tilling it. Then you would till it again to make sure everything's broken down, wait another week, and then plant. This was right away, instant gratification.
Doesn't the grass come through that?
Not if you no, because the newspaper smothers it. It needs light. That's why if you had a very vigorous grass, you might want to do more than 4 layers of newspaper, depending on how it is. Do you have a question?
The soils in this area are very much clay. And I have not tilled in my garden for probably 10 years. But 10 years ago, we opened up a section and it was just solid clay. And my husband and I, or my husband did, added peat moss and compost and so on. And it's been fantastic ever since. But you're telling me that we didn't have to do that?
Well, I didn't tell you also that this is not a religion. So actually there are situations where there are very, very, very sticky, clay, heavy soils that might warrant a one-time digging.
Right. Well, that's what we did.
But sometimes clays are like that because people walk on them when they're wet, or they till them too much, or there's all sorts of, but a well-managed clay often does not need to be tilled. But there are soils that I would recommend a one-time digging, doing just what you said. Let me show you another sequence. I have a field next to my house that's going to put a vegetable garden in. So just quickly, I mowed. I think I spread some lime or fertilizer. Then I had this paper, it's called landscape paper, which is just like craft paper. I spread it out, did the thing with the compost in the beds, wood chips in the paths. Here it is, there's the drip lines already. And 2 weeks later, corn popped up out of the ground like that. One final sequence, when my daughter was in 2nd grade, her teacher had heard me talk about this and thought, in front of the school is just sort of like a poor lawn with some, a couple of scraggly crabapple trees. So he thought this would be a good project for, get volunteers and plant like vegetables, herbs, trees, shrubs, everything, perennials. And so I thought we were just going to talk about this and then maybe in a couple of years start it. But we talked about it. But then he came back with me in 2 weeks. He had the whole thing planned out on the basis of our talk. and he was ready to go. And it was going to be 5,000 square feet of a mixed garden, and he was really good. He went to all these local places. He got free free compost, free wood chips, got a lot of parent volunteers, and one Saturday, everything converged on the front of the school, and here's what we did. We start off with the paper. Here's my daughter. This is almost the only gardening she's ever done. As she told me when she was 6 years old, she's an indoor type person. So it was really cool because we laid out the paper, and then to make the edge of the garden, we just cut it wherever we want to do it. There's no edging, no digging or anything. We just laid it. Those are things of compost just to hold the paper in place. His parents and kids and everything shoveling compost and wood chips, getting in place. This is near the end of that first day. Now this does look like it's been tilled up, right? This actually was not tilled up. This is just the compost was spread there, and you can see it's a dry, sunny day, and the compost just dried up. So it looks dry and looks like soil, and then around each plant there was fresh compost put. So this is the way it looked near the end of the first day. Unfortunately, I don't have. Oh wait, this is like a couple weeks later. I thought I had a picture of the very end of the first day, but literally, went from no garden to garden in one day with blooming plants and everything. So yeah, this was soon after it was completed. And then I did take a subsequent photo, I think it was 4 years later, showing growth in my garden and my daughter. In the garden and my daughter. So that's basically how you would start a weedless garden. What about maintaining it? Often people come up with these systems of, I got this system for, weed-free garden, and you do this, do that, but they never have this thing where year after year, what do you do to make sure it stays weed-free? And as I said, I have done this for 25 years, so I can attest to that. It does work. So the first thing you got to do is, if it's needed, and it may not be needed, is to fertilize. And the reason I say it may not be needed, because by maintaining that organic mulch on the soil, as organic materials break down, they add nutrients. So say, in that knot garden with the buckwheat hulls, that probably does not need any additional fertilizer. Matter of fact, adding fertilizer could promote, more rampant weeds. So there's no reason to add fertilizer. In a vegetable garden, I did compute that 1 inch of compost would supply all the nutrients plants should need for a year. So I don't really need fertilizer, but just to make sure, I did add, I do sprinkle down fertilizer. Actually, I stopped doing it, but I'm not sure if I should continue doing it. But in the late fall, what I like to do is sprinkle down some fertilizer. And the only thing I use is a nitrogen fertilizer, and the only nitrogen fertilizer I use everywhere that's needed is my universal pablum, which is soybean meal for any type of plant, whether it's lawn, which I don't fertilize, or vegetables or whatever. Yeah?
Where would horse manure fit into this picture in the fall?
Ideally, horse manure would fit into being made into compost, and then the compost being used in the garden. That's the ideal, just because you want to have it weed-free and broken down.
Old horse manure.
Yeah, it could, yeah.
Cured a couple of months.
Right. It's not as good as well-made manure, but, it's probably not that bad. It's probably good.
But it's fall and spring.
I like to do it in the fall just because I got a lot of things to do in the spring. And because, as Charles Dudley Warner, anybody ever hear of Charles Dudley Warner? Great gardening book. He wrote My Summer in the Garden. He was a contemporary of Mark Twain. He wrote of the fall garden, the closing scenes need not be funereal. So he really thought, and he went on and on about to get the garden in good shape in the fall so everything looks trim and neat, just like the man who shaves his beard even if he's not going out. Warner, W-A-R-N-E-R. It's actually not really a gardening book, but it's a little of everything. Okay, so yeah.
What do we do with weed-laden lawns?
You mean to get rid of the weeds?
Yeah, and to start seeding again.
You mean to keep it as a lawn?
Yeah, the section of the
Well, weed-laden lawns, there's a lot of things. For instance, if it's crabgrass in the lawn.
It's everything. It's-
Okay, crabgrass, basically mowing higher, people often mow too low, and that crabgrass has more trouble growing in a lawn that's mown high, and plus the lawn's healthier then. There could be other problems like compaction, lime, maybe is needed. Basically, if you keep mowing and you mow correctly, and you have good fertility and good pH, generally lawn will be the thing, and good, and not soil compaction,
A lot of yours is so bad that maybe yours like mine, that you need to start over.
Oh.
Would you start by doing
I don't know, people have asked me that. Actually, a good friend of mine, one of my best friends this spring, I've always, actually, let me just finish and get back to this, okay, because I have a few more things. So the first thing is to, as far as annual maintenance, is to fertilize if needed. Second thing is that cover on the ground, to maintain that cover, because you never want to see soil. So, maintain that smooth cover. This actually is not me and is not my garden, but it is, there's a famous Zen garden in Japan. But it's inspirational as I put down my compost in the garden. So I do maintain the cover. I replenish the wood chips in the past when needed, compost in the beds every year. Third thing I do is any spent plants in the garden, say old marigold plants when the season's ended, old lettuce plants, I want to get rid of them. And the way I get rid of them is I grab them, give them a quick twist, and pull them out. And what I'm trying to do is really just get out the top part of the plant and the main roots, and leave all the little roots in place to rot. So here's that. And it's, even though it might seem tedious, it's really very satisfying. You get this very clean look at the end. On bigger plants, I'm sure a lot of you don't grow corn. I do grow corn, and I grow in hills, and you're not going to twist a corn plant and pull it out of the ground. So any plants that don't come out readily, I actually take a vegetable knife, and a garden knife, and slice around the roots, and then just yank it out. And the nice thing about it is when you do this, then the plant's gone. You could, if it's, say, in a vegetable garden where you're doing succession planting, you could just plant again, something right there. And then the other part of clean up the garden, this is the part I hate to say, but I do have to admit that I do it, is you do get rid of weeds also. There is some weeding involved. And with weeds, I use the same technique as getting rid of garden plants, and not just at the end of the season. I don't want to keep emphasizing the weeding, but there is weeding. And to weed a little throughout the season takes a lot less time than to just do it once at the end of the season. Typically people get all enthusiastic in the spring, garden's weed-free, July 1st, they're getting tired of it, and then it's all weeds in the fall. I mean, my garden right now is as weed-free as it is any time of year. So with weeds, what I do is the same thing. I try and pull them out. If they're larger weeds, I pull them out in total. Like here's a burdock plant. Burdock have that long root, and people say, you can't get long roots, say, on carrots unless you double dig or really dig a lot. So here's this burdock plant, and I really try and get the plant out completely, and there it is still coming out. And the nice thing about this is once that plant's out, rather than, say, dandelions or burdock with a hoe where you just chop off the top and then it keeps coming back, I mean, this plant will not be coming back. And then occasionally, if I have a lot of small weeds, which really hardly ever happens, I'll use a hoe. And the kind of hoe I use is not the kind of hoe that most people use, which is a garden hoe, which is good for mixing concrete, but not really for gardening. I use a hoe that has a blade that's kept parallel to the ground and sharp. So you just like using a sponge mop. You just quickly go. It's actually quite satisfying. I wouldn't mind using it more, except that I really don't have that much use for it. That guy, Charles Dudley Warner, that I said, is the one that was responsible, by the way, for the saying that, oh yeah, a gardener needs an iron back with a hinge in it. If anybody ever heard that. Anyway, so if there's a lot of little weeds, because I go crazy pulling them one by one, use a hoe. And then just to, I'll take some questions, but let me just round it up. So the garden, here's my vegetable garden, the way it would look, say, in fall. You can see the beds add a certain order to it. Here's in winter, spring, and nobody sees any weeds, right? And just quickly, I'll say that if anybody, I'll take questions, but also if anybody has any other questions, I do have a book, Weedless Gardening, and I do have a whole section if anybody's interested, since people did seem interested in drip irrigation. There's a whole thing on drip irrigation in here, where to get it, how to set it up, etc. So somebody had a question I was going to get back. Oh, the lawn. Oh yeah, so I have a good friend. Oh, I'm always amazed because you know, even people that aren't interested in gardening, come spring, something about this primal urge comes out. So I have this one friend who's you know, has no interest in gardening. I have this good picture with my first garden that I ever put in. This was in Wisconsin. Before I knew anything, I was digging the soil, having a miserable time, and he didn't even think he was. And there's a picture of him lying on the ground like this, watching me. So he has no interest in gardening. But every spring he comes up with some new lawn question. And this year was his year to renovate his whole lawn, and he was going to try this method. He sort of started doing it before he asked me about it. But I guess it did work out pretty well. He did put down paper, he did put down compost, and then he sowed seed. You know, and then, you know, cover the seed a little with something. So you could do it. The one caution I would say is that a lot of times lawns are in soils that are already compacted, or just there's certain parts of the lawn that people have walked on so much where it's compacted. And really you have to deal with that compaction some way, which might be digging, or just, you know, there's another way besides digging. Some people use this thing where you just take I mean, it's slow, a garden fork, and I've never done it, but you stick it into the soil and just sort of loosen it, you just loosen the soil.
Same as your golf shoe with the spikes.
Right.
Just walk around.
A lot of walking though. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, the newspaper will, there's no problem to kill the weeds and to get new grass to grow, though I'm saying that it's not that worth it if you have a bad compaction problem, because, you know, the same thing, you know, some weeds, for instance, plantain, usually grows best where there's soil compaction. So if, you know, if you have a lot of plantain, that might indicate soil compaction, and you have to deal with the soil compaction, or it will grow at the expense of grass.